Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the latest in CBM's ongoing webinar series. Today's educational session is entitled Medicare and Medicaid, What Should I Know Now and in the Future? And this 1-hour session is going to be hosted by Counselor Buchanan and Mitchell and Selzer Gurvitch, attorneys at law. Our presenters today are Judy Barnhard, Alex Seleznev, and Todd Bornstein. Judy is a senior vice president at Counselor Buchanan and Mitchell and a director of the firm's professional services, wealth management, and financial planning services group. She is also a senior advisor and chief compliance officer at MBI, the firm's financial advisory subsidiary. In her role as a CPA and certified financial planner, Judy planning, cash flow and budgeting, risk management, and estate planning. She is also a regular presenter for CBM. Alex Seleznev is a senior advisor at CBM. He leads the firm's investment management division and is a co-founder and chief operating officer of MBI. Alex is a certified financial planner and a chartered financial analyst. He is also a regular co-presenter at the firm's market update sessions, which are held every other month. Todd Bornstein is a partner at the law firm of Selzer Gurvitch. His practice is concentrated in the areas of sophisticated estate planning, estate and trust administration and litigation, Medicaid planning, Internal Revenue Service estate tax audits, charitable planning, and tax. He has lectured on estate planning issues at the Department of Justice and for professional and charitable organizations, including providing continuing education for attorneys and accountants. Once again, thank you for joining us. Please do keep your video off as a courtesy to our presenters during the next hour. To those of you who submitted questions during the registration process, thank you for sending them in. They've been shared with our speakers and incorporated into the presentation content. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat box. And if for whatever reason we don't get to your question during the session, please feel free to reach out to either myself or the presenters after the session. Today's session is being recorded, and the presentation slides and a link to the recording will be sent to you after the session. If you're participating using your phone, please email me your name so I can make sure we get the slides to you. I've sent my email address into the chat box. And with that now, I'm going to turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today on this beautiful February day, at least here in Maryland. Actually, it's supposed to be in low 50s tomorrow, so good time to spend some time outside. So Medicare, where do you start and what is it? So Medicare, of course, provides healthcare benefits, healthcare insurance to be specific for retirees. Now, one thing to make clear, it is very different from Medicaid. These are very different programs. Every so often people do use these terms interchangeably, and perhaps that is not what they're trying to do, but I hear that every so often. And our co-presenter, Todd Bornstein, will discuss Medicaid in detail in the second part of our webinar. So when should you apply? So for most people, it would be at age 65, or perhaps when their so-called creditable coverage ends. And to be essentially specific, when they disengage their employer and they no longer have their employer provided coverage, assuming, of course, they already reached their 65th birthday. Now, once you reach that age, let's say 64 and 9 months, that is usually a good time to review your options and potentially apply at least for Part A. And Judy Barnhard will discuss different options actually on the separate slide. So you have 3 months prior to your 65th birthday to apply. The actual month when you turn 65 is included, and you also have 3 months after your 65th birthday. So it's actually a pretty long 7-month period to evaluate your options and make sure that you come up with the best choice for yourself. Now, if you're applying based on the end of your creditable coverage, essentially you're perhaps retiring, or perhaps your employer no longer offers any health insurance, which does happen every so often, you'll actually have the special period of 8 months to apply for Medicare, regardless of, if it's beginning of the year, end of the year, it's a special period of 8 months. Now, if you miss this period, either you're not applying at your age 65, or perhaps you're no longer covered by the creditable coverage, there's a 10% penalty that would apply to Part B and Part D premiums for every 12 months of delaying your enrollment. And that is very important. Every so often people simply forget. Yes, that happens. So there is this 10% penalty. Now, there are a few exceptions to this rule. And one of them, which would apply to, let's say, many people, is if they can continue to actively work and they receive coverage, the coverage is provided by their employers, and it's a group plan, meaning they have more than 20 employees. So it's a group plan with more than 20 employees. A common misconception is when it's a small firm, let's say it's husband and wife, and maybe they have 2 other employees working for them. They reach their 65th birthday. They say, well, we have this plan and we're still actively working. We're going to work for a long time. They do not apply for Part B and or Part D. And then later on, they discover that there is a penalty that is applied to them. Now, we received 3 or 4 questions on what I'm about to discuss, and I thought this would be a good time to do it. If you're covered by your spouse's plan, essentially you're not working, you just reached your 65th birthday, but your spouse is still working, and again, he or she is covered by the employer plan, you do not have to apply for Part B, meaning there would be no penalty if you decide to stay on your spouse's policy. That doesn't apply by itself, by the way, that you shouldn't look into it, but I would say in many cases, people would just prefer to stay under their spouse's coverage. In terms of the initial application, you would apply on the Social Security website, www.socialsecurity.gov. One of the common issues pretty much happens every year is when people apply for both Social Security and Medicare benefits. These are very, very different. We actually had a webinar 3 weeks ago dedicated to Social Security. And I am inclined to say that for most people, these decisions are, of course, part of their overall financial plan, but in some sense, they're independent. Most common is when people apply for Medicare, prior to their 65th birthday, again, 3 months prior, and then they apply for their Social Security benefits, let's say when they're 67 or maybe even age 70. So you don't have to do it at the same time. And then finally, once you're in the system, you can always change your benefits. You can look at different options during the open enrollment period that starts on October 15th of each year and ends on December 7th. So again, pretty significant window for you to change your mind. And that is actually something that we recommend. If you're comfortable, you don't necessarily have to do it annually, but every couple of years or so, consider a review in your benefits. Judy.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So in this slide, we're going to go over what the different parts of Medicare are, starting with Medicare Part A, which is the coverage for hospital stays, skilled nursing facilities, hospice care, and limited home care. And Part A is free to most people. Now, however, if you have not worked at least 40 credit hours, same principles basically as being eligible for Social Security, then you may have to actually pay to participate in the Medicare Part A. But most people, as long as they have met those 40 credit hours, Medicare Part A is free, and that applies also to spousal qualifications. So, if you're married at age 65 and you haven't worked the 40 hours, but your spouse has, you'll be able to qualify for Part A free. It does not apply, however, if you become disabled prior to age 65 and you don't have your quarter hours. So, one of the financial planning tips that we're going to, encourage is check your Social Security statement, make sure you have your 40 credit hours in, because you never know what's going to come down the pike in terms of disabilities or change in marriage status or what have you. Medicare Part B, that's the one you do pay a premium for. We have a chart we're going to be going over and explaining how that is charged. So the Part B is for doctor services, medical supplies, preventive care, and Part A and B cover close to 80% of your health expenses. Part B does include one free wellness checkup every year without any deductible. And when you pay for it, if you're on Social Security, you'll have it deducted from your Social Security check. If you're not on Social Security at the time, then you'll be billed and you'd have to be paying that amount, that premium amount. Part D is the prescription drug plan, and it varies. You'll see here, $7 to $89 a month. It is something that you research and basically decide what's the appropriate plan for you. And it does vary based on your income level, which we'll cover in another chart. So the Medicare supplemental insurance, otherwise known as Medigap, as opposed to the Medicare Advantage plan, they're two very different. The Medigap is something where you can basically, purchase additional insurance to cover the costs that are not covered by Medicare Parts A and B. They're sold by private insurers. One reason you would want a Medigap policy is if you plan on traveling outside of the United States. Many retirees decide that they want to live overseas, or they certainly want to take advantage of traveling. And traditional Part A and B do not cover medical expenses outside of the United States. So that's one reason you might want Medigap. It's also guaranteed renewable. So if should you have, diagnosis of cancer or some other, life-threatening disease, the Medigap insurance is guaranteed renewable. I did want to caution you, you do want to make sure that your doctor, provider accepts Medicare assignment. This is going to be very important in terms of how much of your costs are being covered by Medicare and what your needs are for the Medigap insurance. Finally, the Medicare Advantage plan is a completely separate plan that is meant to duplicate, if you will, Part A, B, D, and the Medigap, but in a separate plan that is similar to employer-sponsored health insurance that you might already be accustomed to. It too is offered by private health insurance companies. The Medicare Advantage plan assesses what their premiums will be, their deductibles and their services, and it adjusts on January 1st of each year. You cannot buy Medigap if you are a participant in a Medicare Advantage plan. So think of it as two completely, really separate plans. Next slide, please. So what's not covered in parts A and B? Well, let's cover part A first. This is very important in terms of long-term care. Many people think, well, their long-term care would be covered by their Medicare, and it's not. We'll go over what the limitations are in terms of hospital stay and skilled nursing stays, but it's not to be a substitute for purchasing a long-term care insurance policy. Doesn't cover dental care, eye exams related to prescription of glasses, dentures, cosmetic surgery, acupuncture, hearing aids, which is interesting. We get that question a lot, and exams for fitting them, routine foot care. It also doesn't cover private rooms if you're in a hospital or skilled nursing facility, unless it's necessary, medically necessary for you to be in a private room. Doesn't cover private duty nurses. So typically, if you are in the hospital or skilled nursing center under Medicare Part A, you're only going to be allowed, semi-private rooms, and of course it covers your meals, your nursing, and your drugs. But long-term care is something that we encourage you to look at separate policies for. Now, for Part A, this is if you are in a hospital or a skilled nursing facility, there is a deductible. It's $1,484 per benefit period. Now, a benefit period begins the first day of inpatient hospital admission, and it ends 60 days after your release from the hospital. So after 60 days, if you are readmitted to a hospital, a new benefit period starts. That's important to keep in mind, that 60 days, because obviously if you were to go back on day 59, you'd still be under the previous period, and you would have already met that 1,484 deductible. For days 1 through 60, there's 0 coinsurance. Days 61 to 90, 371 coinsurance per day of each benefit period. And days 91 and beyond, there's a 742 coinsurance per each lifetime reserve day after age 90. Now, essentially what this means is that everybody is given 60 days. It's called a lifetime reserve day through your lifetime, and it can be tacked on at the end of a benefit period. And after that, the individual is responsible for all Medicare medical costs incurred in a hospital or a skilled nursing facility. Under Part B, there's a $203 deductible per year, and then you pay 20% of the Medicare approved amount for your doctors and other preventive care visits. Other exceptions, just to note, inpatient medical health care in a psychiatric hospital is limited to 190 days during your lifetime, and skilled nursing pays zero. You pay zero amount for the first 20 days, $185.20 for days 21 through 100, and then all costs, you're responsible for all costs after 100 days. Next slide, please. Here's the donut hole. Donut hole applies to prescription drugs. There's a deductible phase, $445 in 2021. And then under the initial coverage phase, you'll pay copay and coinsurance up to an amount of $4,130 in 2021. And then you enter what's called the donut hole, which is the coverage gap. And during that coverage gap, you pay 25% of the prescription drugs cost up until you reach $6,550 in prescription total costs. And then you basically graduate into what's called catastrophic coverage phase, of which you pay 5% of the drugs. So just wanted to point that out when you're deciding whether or not you want to purchase a Medigap plan, or if you want to have a Medicare Advantage plan. Keep in mind the donut hole for the prescriptions, and then also what is covered under the inpatient hospital and skilled care nursing, because that's what you want to make sure that you're covering. Next slide, please. Okay, so here are the two paths, and as I mentioned before, they are two different paths. Under the left side, you're basically combining Medicare Parts A, B, D with a Medigap coverage. And under Path 2, you are acquiring a separate Medicare Advantage plan. Think of the Medicare Advantage plan as an all-in-one alternative. It's like, operates more like an HMO or PPO. Some of the benefits is that it does also include vision, hearing, dental, chiropractors. So, there are some more expenses that you can, when you shop, you can get a Medicare Advantage plan that will cover that. But the limitations is it may be area restricted, in-network doctor restricted. You may need to get referrals if you are going to be going to see specialists. May not cover foreign travel, and it's going to have higher deductibles but lower premiums. And as you see there, 39% of enrollees are choosing Medicare Advantage plans, and this actual number is growing. And on the left side, as I mentioned, you can purchase the supplemental Medigap to cover foreign travel. How do you choose? Well, You can go to your state health insurance assistance program, otherwise known as SHIP. And you can also go to medicare.gov/plan-compare and basically consider what your health history is, what your family health history is, and decide what would actually provide the best coverage for you. According to Fidelity Investments, a 65-year-old couple retiring in 2020 can expect to spend $295,000 in healthcare and medical expenses throughout their retirement, and that's an increase from $285,000 in the prior year. Most of that, as you can imagine, is extended stays for long-term care where the hospital insurance stops. Alex?
Thank you, Judy. So we actually received several questions prior to this webinar from federal employees essentially, and that is one of our specialties. A good quarter of our clients are either existing or former federal employees. But what I'm about to discuss, and I will make that clear, does apply to those in the private sector as well. So if you're part of FEHB, or essentially Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan. Once you reach your 65th birthday, just like with any other plan, you're entitled to Part A, in most cases without making any premiums. Again, as long as you've been paying into the system for at least 10 years. Normally, we would actually recommend that you apply for Part A. And the reason that's the case is because, well, if you do need some kind of some kind of hospitalization, perhaps Part A would cover some of the expenses that would not be covered by FEHB. Again, deductibles, coinsurance, or perhaps some other charges that are essentially not allowed by the plan. The same actually applies to private sector employees. We would normally recommend that you apply for Part A when you reach your 65th birthday. Now, with Part B, it's becoming a little more complex, and the answer to that question, it really, it depends if you should be applying it for or not. So if you're still working, you're part of FEHB, or perhaps you're covered under your spouse's group plan, you do not have to enroll in Part B when you turn 65. Again, there's not going to be a penalty if that's the case. We covered that in the very first slide today. That said, depending on your actual plan that you're covered, you may still benefit from Part B by essentially receiving almost complete coverage for all of your medical expenses. And with FEHB specifically, there's a plan document, and on page 9 of the plan document, it would tell you specifically how it would work with Part B of Medicare. So if that's something that you're considering, keep that in mind. Now, what you're not seeing on the slide here, this assumes that someone is still working. Presumably, if they're still working, there's more income coming in, so the Part B becomes relatively expensive, relative meaning to their cash flow. Now, once both of them retire, and let's say they decided to stay under FEHB, which is, by the way, a very good decision, their Part B premiums may be significantly less. And as a result of that, perhaps decision to essentially have two types of coverages starts making more sense. So keep that in mind. With Part D, it's much easier. Federal health plans have very comprehensive drug coverage. So for most people, there's really no benefit of enrolling in Part D. There are some retirees who have limited resources, and perhaps they would qualify for extra financial help if they enroll in Part D. But at least in our experience, that is normally not the case. So Part D is not necessarily important for federal employees. Judy?
Sure. In this slide, you'll see what it actually costs to participate in Medicare Parts B and D. And it is means tested. Interestingly enough, it's 2 years behind. So your 2021 premiums are based on your 2019 income tax return. And in this chart, you'll see single, married filing joint, and married filing separate. These figures are for what's called your modified adjusted gross income. Now, the modified adjusted gross income starts with taking your adjusted gross income from your tax return as filed in 2019, and adding back certain items, including tax-exempt interest. Interestingly, a lot of retirees might think, well, I'll have tax-exempt interest, so it'll reduce my federal income tax, but that's an add back for determining your modified adjusted gross income. Other add backs include your IRA deduction if you're still working and able to fund an IRA. Excluded foreign earned income. So, for those people that move overseas and have foreign earned income, that is an add back for purposes of this. And some other losses which are fairly technical. So just keep that in mind. This is a premium that you'll pay per month. And of course, you'll see if your modified adjusted gross income is over $500,000 single, you'll have a $505 Medicare Part B premium per month plus the Part D premium. Now, what if you disagree with the premium that's being assessed to you, or if you've had a life change? Let's say your circumstances are different in 2021 than they were in 2019. You can appeal. You can file an SSA Form 44, life-changing event, and you can also request for reconsideration. Now, in our experience, when someone like sells a house and has a capital gain in 2019, and that's pushed them up into a higher tax bracket and therefore also increase their premiums, our experience is they haven't been very successful in actually getting the reconsideration, but hey, why not try? It all depends on the facts and circumstances of your situation. Alex?
All right. Thank you, Judy. So over the next couple of slides, we'll discuss some of the planning strategies, specifically when we talk about planning for your income in the context of, reducing your Medicare premium, or essentially keeping you in the same bracket, again, for Medicare purposes, for as long as possible. And by the way, everything that I'm about to discuss applies to regular tax bracket, tax planning. So with Part B, as Judy just mentioned, you would be paying a premium of $208 per month, assuming you're single, as long as your modified adjusted gross income is between $88,000 and $111,000. So if we're planning for that, we would want to do our best, and sometimes it's not really practical, to target your income at something like $100,000, understanding that perhaps it will, be higher than that closer to the end of the year. And the reason you would want to do that is so that you're not in the next bracket for Medicare purposes. And you see, with regular taxes, and Medicare does work differently with, of course, regular taxes. Anytime you're in the next tax bracket, well, you're paying more on this additional amount of income, right? That's how the next bracket would be applied. With Medicare, if you're $100 above the threshold, well, you're in the next tax bracket. And in this particular example, your premium would go up by almost $90 per month. So what are some of the planning ideas to keep in mind? For many of our clients, or at least for some of them actually, they have pensions, or perhaps they're part of a cash balance plan. So when they decide to essentially retire or disengage their employer, they usually have a choice. They can either annuitize that pension or the cash balance plan and essentially receive a certain amount, usually per month, for their lifetime, or they can do an IRA rollover. And that, by the way, applies, again, back to the federal employees, to your thrift savings plan. You can either keep it as is, you can annuitize it, or you can do an IRA rollover. Now, this is, of course, a financial planning question. So the answer, if you should annuitize or do the rollover, would depend on those circumstances. But keep in mind, once you annuitize, you essentially permanently increase your taxable income, because that amount, you'll essentially receive it for life. You have no control over it. So in some years, perhaps you don't even need that additional cash, but it would still be, essentially, you would still receive it and pay taxes on it. And of course, in the context of Medicare, chances are you would also be paying more in Part B and or actually Part D premiums. With an IRA rollover, essentially you retain a lot of control. You can always decide how much is distributed in what year, and of course, again, in the context of Medicare Part B, that would likely help you. With Roth conversions, the idea to minimize your required minimum distributions once you reach your age 72, which is the new threshold. There are of course many pros and cons to doing that, and that's entirely separate analysis here. But one point I'll make: if you're considering that, usually the more time you have, the better. If you decide to do this a year, prior to your retirement, usually it's not that beneficial. And then another piece here, which is very situational, is the idea of rolling over your IRA into your 401k plan to eliminate your required minimum distributions if you're still working. And it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, actually, meaning you eliminate your RMDs, and let's say you continue working to age 75, but then once you actually begin your required minimum distributions, well, they will likely be higher because you didn't take any in 3 years in my example. But that's, again, one of the options. In terms of some of the common trigger events of why people get usually unpleasantly surprised with their Medicare Part B premiums, sometimes they double, triple, or sometimes they even quadruple, is what Judy was referring to earlier, is when people, let's say, have very steady income, Social Security, pension, maybe some required minimum distributions, and then they sell their home in Bethesda and move to Florida. Well, that generates, $300,000-$400,000 capital gain that is reported, let's say, in your 2021 tax return, and then 2 years later, you discover that your Part B premiums actually quadrupled. But there is actually a form that you can sign or complete, SSA 561. And as Judy mentioned earlier, it works in some cases and it doesn't work in other cases, but it's certainly worth trying. In terms of your portfolio, and there's actually going to be a separate example on that, perhaps there's lack of tax planning, or perhaps there's a change in strategy that was implemented perhaps poorly. Instead of stretching over a period of 3 to 5 years, perhaps you're trying to make your portfolio more conservative as you're reaching your retirement years. Instead of stretching, it's done in 1 year, and again, it's done in 2021. 2 years later, you discover that your Part B premiums are 2 or 3, sometimes 4 times higher. In terms of the portfolio dividends, similar to what I just mentioned, but usually, again, the idea is to shift as much of taxable income as possible into your IRA/401k accounts. And as a result of that, again, your taxable income is lower, and hopefully that would keep you in the lower tax bracket for general tax purposes, but perhaps also lower your Part B premiums. Next example on this particular chart would actually demonstrate what I was referring to. So we have two, I will say, hypothetical clients, but this is actually really real scenarios here. We have John and Janet. Very similar situation. Both are 75 years old. Both are single. Both have pensions of $75,000, and both have to take out their required minimum distributions of $22,000 per year in this case. Now, John hasn't been spending on all that much time on his portfolio tax efficiency. As a result of that, it generates 3% in dividends. It's not sheltered. He trades a lot in his account, or his investments are just not tax efficient. So that generates a lot of capital gains. Janet, on the other hand, moved a lot of dividend-paying stocks or funds into her IRA. She uses tax-efficient investment options in her portfolio. So as a result of that, her portfolio income is much less, significantly less compared to John. Now, where I'm going with all of this, John is paying much more in Part B premiums, $386 per month, than Janet. Now, over a period of 1 year, of course, it adds up. It's more than $1,000 in 1 year. Over a period of 10 years, it's closer to $11,000. And that is, of course, in addition to paying more just in regular taxes, assuming both of them are in 24 and 8% brackets for federal and state tax purposes. And that, of course, would result in significant tax savings if your portfolio strategy is more efficient over time. The point I'm trying to make here is, This is of course a simple example. This is a hypothetical, but many people are not even aware that this is happening, meaning they're paying too much, even though perhaps they need to make some changes, and they would end up in a much more tax efficient situation. And with that, I will ask Todd to discuss Medicaid.
All right, thank you. So Judy and Alex did a great job explaining Medicare, and what I'm going to talk about is Medicaid, which, as Alex said, is a completely different program, and I'm going to talk about the differences between Medicaid and Medicare as far as what it covers, and I'm going to talk about the eligibility requirements for Medicaid and strategies that people use to try and preserve and protect their assets so they can qualify for Medicaid, while at the same time, again, protecting and preserving assets either to use for their benefit for things that Medicaid doesn't cover, or to move money down to their children so that it all doesn't get eaten up from long-term care costs. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so Medicare versus Medicaid. As Alex and Judy said, Medicare is health insurance primarily for people age 65 and older, or if you're under 65 and disabled. There is no means testing. It's health insurance, and no matter what your assets or your income is, you are eligible to receive that health insurance coverage, that medical coverage. The big issue with Medicare is it does not cover long-term care. It doesn't cover costs if you need to go into a nursing home. Okay, Medicaid, on the other hand, it does. And it will pay and it will cover costs if you need long-term care, you didn't have long-term care insurance, and you need to go into a nursing home, which is very expensive. Medicaid will pay for that. Okay. The big difference is, in order to qualify for Medicaid, there's a means test, and essentially you have to be very sick to qualify for Medicaid, and you have to be very broke to qualify for Medicaid. And I'm going to talk about the financial means tests in the upcoming slides, but that's the big difference. Medicaid, you have to have very little assets, and then long-term care will be covered. And so that's the big difference. A very important point about Medicaid is it covers nursing home care. It primarily does not cover care for somebody to come in the home, such as an aide to come in the home to take care of you. There are certain programs called waiver programs that will allow for that, but practically speaking, they really don't exist practically speaking. There's a wait list in Maryland, and it's 30,000 people to try and to get on to be able to qualify to have in-home care if you need like long-term care treatment, but it really is primarily for a nursing home. All right, next slide, please. Okay. Qualifying for Medicaid. As I said, you got to be very sick and you got to be very broke to qualify. So let's say there is a single person, they're not married. Okay, there's an income limit and there is an asset limit. Okay, the income limit is if your income is above the cost of care, whatever the monthly cost of care is for the nursing home that you're staying in, then you don't qualify. So in Maryland, there is an assumed cost of care of approximately $10,000. So if, for example, the nursing home charges $10,000 a month and somebody's monthly income is $11,000, they're not going to qualify. They'll just use their monthly income and they'll pay for the nursing home care. On the other hand, if their income is less, so let's say mom is going to a home and she has pension income and other income, Social Security of $6,000, well, then she may qualify. So she'll use all $6,000. All of that will go to the cost of care, and Medicaid will pick up the other $4,000 And so basically, from an income standpoint, you're going to use all your income towards the cost of care. Okay. The big problem is the asset limitation. Okay. In order to qualify for Medicaid, you can only have in your name no more than $2,500. Okay, that's it. $2,500. And if you have more than that, then you don't qualify for Medicaid. You're going to have to use your own money to pay for your care. Okay, there's a couple of exceptions. You are allowed to have a home. So if there's let's say my mom's living and she's in her home and the home is, here in Bethesda and it's worth $600,000, she can keep the home and go into a nursing home and still qualify. So that value of the home does not count towards the 2,500 limit. Okay. However, in order to allow the home to keep the home as an exception, there has to be an intent for mom that at some time in the future she'll be able to return to the home. That's a subjective test, so usually that's not a problem. If mom intends, she can say, yeah, I'm intending to go back to the home, and that would usually be okay. Okay. The other thing is there's an equity limit, so the home can't have equity of more than $600,000. So if the home is worth $1 million, then that home wouldn't qualify. Okay. The other potential problem is that, let's say my mom goes into a nursing home and the home qualifies. So the home's worth $600,000 and she otherwise qualifies. The problem is that when my mom dies, so let's say she's in a nursing home and she's getting hundreds of that, she's there for 5 years and Medicaid is paid $400,000 of care for her over that period. When my mom dies, Medicaid will put a lien on the home and the home will be sold at my mom's death, and Medicaid will be able to take back from the sales proceeds all the money that they paid during that period. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the qualifications are different if there's a husband and wife, okay, married, and only one of them needs to go into the nursing home. So here's the rule. The person that is going into the nursing home, they are referred to as the institutionalized spouse. And the person that's staying at home that's healthy, they're referred to as the community spouse. Okay, the rule is the person that's going into the nursing home, it's the same limits that we talked about a minute ago. In their name alone, they can only have no more than $2,500. Okay. The person who is well and still living at home or in the community, they can have an unlimited amount of income. Okay. And B, they can have assets in addition to the home. They can have assets of up to $130,000. Okay. The home is also not counted, and there is no equity limit. So essentially, if you have mom and dad needs to go into a nursing home, mom can have a house and it could be worth $1 million or whatever. There's no equity limit as to the value of the house. And mom can also have assets up to $130,000. In addition to the home, you can also have a car, and there are a couple other minor things that you can have. But basically, the well spouse can have the home of unlimited value and up to only $130,000. Okay. The other big difference is there is no lien on the home. So if, in my example, dad is in the nursing home for 4 years and they have spent, a few $100,000 on dad's care, when mom later dies, if she never ends up going into a home or using Medicaid, when upon mom's death, there is no lien. All of the sales proceeds can go to the family. There is no lien. All right, next slide, please. Okay. All right, so I said that in order to qualify, you basically, you have to be sick enough to qualify, and you can't have any assets in your name. Okay, so somebody heard me talk a while ago, and I'm going to give you an example. So you have mom who has about $100,000 of assets, and she has a stroke. So now she has a stroke. She needs to go into a nursing home. She has $100,000, and she knows she's going to have to spend all $100,000 for her nursing home care. That's going to be approximately $10,000 a month. Mom's going to run out of money. She's going to spend all $100,000 within 10 months. She doesn't want to do that. She'd rather give the money to her son so that she can preserve the money for her family. She doesn't want to spend it all on nursing home care. So she figures, I know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to give it to my son. That way, I won't have any money in my name. So that's what mom does. She writes a check. She gives the $100,000 to her son, and she applies for Medicaid. And she says, look, I have no money. I have less than $2,500, and I should be able to qualify for Medicaid benefits. But what happens is Medicaid imposes a penalty for every $10,000. It's actually $9,673. But for every $10,000 that somebody gives away within 10 years of applying for Medicaid, they issue a 1-month penalty. So in this example, if mom writes a check to her son for $100,000, and she applies for Medicaid, so now she has no money, mom won't qualify for Medicaid benefits for 10 months. Okay, so that's $100,000 that she gave away, a $10,000 penalty per month. So for 10 months, unless her son agrees to pay for it, mom is in big trouble. Okay, so Medicaid says you can't just give your money away. If you give your money away, we're going to penalize you for that. Now, as long as mom gives her money away, and if she doesn't need to go on benefits for 5 years after she gives the money away, then she's golden. There is no penalty. But if you have to go on Medicaid within the 5-year period of when you make the gift, there's going to be that penalty. All right, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to talk about some various techniques that people use to try and preserve their assets while at the same time qualifying for Medicaid. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the example that I used a moment ago, but in this example, mom, she heard that, oh, I need to give my money away, and as long as I make it 5 years without having to go and qualify for Medicaid, I'm set. So 4 years ago, mom gave $100,000 to her son. This was 4 years ago. All of a sudden, she suffers a stroke. She has $30,000. And so she goes into the nursing home, and it costs $10,000 a month. So for the first 3 months, she uses her money. She pays $10,000, $10,000, $10,000. She's now broke, and she applies for Medicaid. Well, the problem is she gave her son that $100,000 4 years ago. That it wasn't more than 5 years. There's going to be a penalty. So now mom's in a really bad situation because she gave the money to her son 4 years ago, and she doesn't have any money, and she doesn't qualify for Medicaid for 10 months because that's the penalty period. Okay. It'll be fine if son still has the money, but what if son got divorced in that time, or son was in a car accident and that money ended up going to creditors, or he was sued, or like I said, in a divorce, it ended up with the ex-spouse. So that's the potential problem with giving money away is if you don't make it the 5 years and that person still doesn't have the money, you could be in trouble. Next slide, please. Okay. So an alternative to what I just talked about is mom could instead give the money not to her son, but she could give it to a trust for her son's benefit. And if it's to a trust for her son's benefit, and she makes it the 5 years, again, she's set. But if she doesn't make it the 5 years, like in this example, 4 years pass and she had an unexpected stroke and needed to go into skilled nursing care, if it's in trust, there's a greater likelihood that the money will be there. And the reason is because it's in trust and not in her son's name, it doesn't belong to the son. So if the son gets divorced, the money is there, it's protected. It won't go to a spouse in a divorce. If son gets into a car accident or an accident or is otherwise sued, it's protected. It's not the son's money. So if you're going to decide that while you are healthy, you want to make sure that there's some money there to be preserved, the way to do it is you make a gift to a trust for the benefit of family members. And if you make it by the 5-year period, you're fine. If you don't make it, like in this example, 4 years pass and mom has to go into a nursing home, there's still a way that the trust funds could be used to pay for mom's care during that 10-month penalty period. And what would happen is the trustee of the trust would make a distribution to the son, because the son is the beneficiary of the trust, and the son could voluntarily take the money and then use it to pay for mom's care during that penalty period. Okay. It can't be a pre-arranged, there can't be an arrangement or a legally binding agreement so that son must use the money to pay for mom's care, because then that wouldn't qualify. Okay, so by using a trust, there is a way to preserve and protect the money, but it's not for everyone. Mom is truly giving up the use of that money, and she's going to have to rely on the trustee making a distribution to her son and her son being willing to use that money for mom's care if she needs it. All right, next slide, please. All right, another example of a way to help preserve and protect assets is if mom's living in the home, she can give the home to her son, okay, or to family members or children, and reserve and retain the right to live in the home for the rest of her life. And so even though mom has given the home, and upon her death, the home will go to her kids, and mom has the right to continue to live in the home no matter how long she lives. Again, if mom doesn't need to go into a nursing home or skilled care for 5 years from the time that she made that gift, then she's okay, and the home will pass free to the kids, and there won't be any lien on the home, and the value of the home can be preserved for the kids upon mom's death. Next slide, please. Okay, one of the best ways to protect and preserve money and assets for your family is not to have assets in mom and dad's name in the first place. Because if mom and dad and assets are in mom and dad's name and they're greater than that limit that I talked about, the $2,500 limit, then it could be a countable asset. But if instead you set it up so that assets are in trust for mom and dad, then that is a way that you can protect and preserve those funds. So for example, a husband and wife can structure their wills, and instead of leaving assets to each other outright when one of them dies, if, for example, husband dies first and he leaves assets in a trust for his wife, it's possible that the value of the assets in that trust will not be counted and not disqualify wife from qualifying for Medicaid. Okay, another very common technique is if we have elderly parents, let's say they're in their 80s and 90s, they're not sick, they're not in a nursing home. If they have wills, instead of leaving their money to their children outright, and their children are in their, let's say, 60s, if they leave their money in a trust for their children, then that money that's in the trust for their children that is not counted as an asset, and that would not disqualify them from Medicaid benefits. All right, next slide, please. Okay. Let's say that you have somebody, our mom and dad, and they didn't do any planning. They didn't make any gifts before, and all of a sudden somebody gets sick. Well, there is a way to at least save and preserve potentially half of somebody's money. So this is a strategy called the modern half loaf. And what would happen here is, let's say mom gets sick, she has $100,000. We know that mom will have to pay $10,000 a month for the next 10 months. She's going to have to spend all her money for her care. Instead of that, there is a way that mom could give away $50,000 to her son and buy an annuity for $50,000. And that annuity says that for the next 5 months, the annuity company will pay to mom $10,000 a month. Okay, so what mom does is she has $100,000. She purchases an annuity for $50,000. She gives $50,000 to her son. She's broke. She has no money. She qualifies for Medicaid. Medicaid then assesses a 5-month penalty for the gift that she made of $50,000 to her son. So mom now doesn't qualify for 5 months. Well, she needs somebody to pay for her care for that 5-month period. Well, she's going to pay for it because the annuity company is going to pay to mom $10,000 over the next 5 months. And so as a result, mom was able to pass half of what she had to her son and always have her care paid for during the penalty period. And how am I doing on time?
Well, it's 12:56. If you want to do a couple more minutes, and then maybe we take some questions.
All right, I'm going to wrap it. All right, next slide, please. All right, next slide. All right, before in my examples, I said that if somebody creates, in my example, when mom left money to a trust for her son, then son could potentially use that money in case mom needed it for her care. Okay, what doesn't work generally is if mom takes her money and puts it in a trust, the trustee can't use mom's money that was in trust to pay for mom's care or that is protected. So if mom takes her money and puts it in a trust, it is only sheltered if it doesn't benefit her, if it benefits her son or other family members. It can't benefit her. Okay, there's an exception. And the exception is that, let's say mom has $100,000 and she has to enter a nursing home, and she knows that she's going to blow through that $100,000 within a year. And by the end of that, $10,000 a month. And by the end of that period, she's not going to have any money left. And the problem is she's not going to have money for really anything. If she needs things that Medicaid doesn't pay for, like a motorized scooter or dental implants or things that Medicaid simply doesn't cover, she's not going to have the money to pay for it after 10 months. Well, Medicaid will allow mom to put that $100,000 in a special type of trust called a pooled asset trust. And while it's there, then that trust can make distributions to mom to pay for those extra expenses that Medicaid would not ordinarily cover to make mom's life in the nursing home a little easier and a little bit better. And the money will be there for her. The catch to that is that upon mom's death, whatever is left of that $100,000, it's gone. It's going to go to pay back whatever expenses Medicaid paid for her, or go to charity, but it can't go to mom's family members. All right, I covered a lot in a little bit. Usually this is a much longer presentation in a short period of time. So thank you.
Thank you, Todd. It's a lot of useful information. And if everyone is okay, should we take 5-10 minutes to cover some of the questions? Is that okay, Judy, Todd?
Sure, go ahead.
Absolutely, yes.
All right, so here's one for you, actually, Todd. I believe it's for you from the chat box. Is there a monthly maximum Medicaid pays for assisted living?
Oh, it's not a maximum. They're gonna pay for whatever the cost of care is for that particular place. So they will pay whatever the cost of care is for that particular facility, they will pay, that's what they will pay for. And Medicaid, when Medicaid pays for cost of care, the facility only can get the approved rate. So let's say it's it's approximately $10,000. That's what they will pay for. So you may have a nursing home that charges, when Medicaid isn't paying for it, private people $15,000 a month. But if Medicaid is paying it, the top rate that they can charge is $10,000, and Medicaid will pay the $10,000.
Thank you for that, Todd. So if anyone else has any questions, please type them in the chat box. And while you're doing that, we'll address some of the questions that were submitted to us prior to the webinar. So here's one. What is the process for Medicare registration if an individual plans to remain employed and covered under their current, in parentheses, employer-provided health plan? What do you think, Judy? What do you think about this question?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
No problem. What is the process for Medicare registration if an individual plans to remain employed and covered under current, in parentheses, employer-provided health plan?
Oh, okay. Yeah, no. In general, I would recommend that you always apply for the Part A, right? It's a free, as long as you've met the 10 years or the 40 quarters. So you're at least in the system for that. And there's no premium that you're paying for it, and you're getting the hospitalization coverage. The question as to whether or not you want the Part B and Part D really has to do with what your current employer offers and whether or not your current employer falls under the under 20 employees or over 20 that Alex was explaining. If it's under 20, then you should go ahead and sign up for the B and the D. But if you're over 20, it's possible you would want to keep your current health insurance plan if it costs you less than it does to switch to the Medicare plans.
Thank you, Judy. And here's one again from the chat box. How long does it take to get Medicaid approval? I guess this one is for you, Todd.
Yeah, so it's usually a couple, at a minimum like 2 to 3 months, but so in order to get approval, you have to provide Medicaid with, bank records and financial records, because they want to make sure that you haven't made gifts during the past, prior 5 years. So,
Todd?
I think Todd just froze.
All right, some kind of technical issue.
I'm glad he didn't freeze during the presentation.
Oh, well, maybe he'll get reconnected. So here's another question. What happens if I become unemployed and lose my healthcare coverage? Question mark. May I and my spouse begin Medicare immediately? Must we wait? So perhaps this is something I can cover. So if you're under the age of 65, let's say 62 or 63 years old, perhaps you would be covered under COBRA, which would be provided for you. Some employers would do it for you if you become unemployed. If that is not the case, then you can go and apply under ACA, or how people usually refer to it as Obamacare. There are exchanges in each state where you can apply. If you become unemployed post your age 65, let's say 67 years old, then yes, you can certainly apply for Medicare. So Todd, I don't know if you want to finish answering that question. Yes, you're back.
Okay. Usually 2 to 3 months. The reason is you're going to have to provide a lot of financial information to show that you're financially qualified, and they also want to make sure that you haven't made gifts over the past couple of years. So they're going to look at that. Usually it takes 2 to 3 months at a minimum to get all that information together.
Thank you, Todd.
So Alex, there's one in the chat box. It says if you select options 1 with parts A, B, and D, meaning the traditional Medicare route, and the supplements, do you also recommend additional insurance such as Aflac to cover the nursing or long-term care insurance? So if you have assets to protect, right? You're not a candidate for Medicaid planning, but you have assets to protect. Absolutely, I would recommend the long-term care insurance, and as we found out, it's typically best to purchase in your 40s or 50s. That's the sweetest time in terms of the premiums that you'll be charged. You definitely recommend that you look into it if you have a history, your family has a history of needing such care, because that's very expensive, as we have shown, and that is what is, I guess, the main component of what these medical expenses are that you're likely to incur over your retirement.
Thank you, Judy. There's one question, we missed it somehow. Are pre-existing conditions covered for all plans? Judy, Todd, would you like to cover this one?
Well, that's what I was saying on if you go through Medicare and you end up getting the supplemental, you're guaranteed renewal, and that's very important. You're not under the Medicare Advantage plan. So if you think that you might have a pre-existing condition, you probably want to stay under the traditional Medicare plans with the supplemental.
All right, here's another one. I am overseas most of the year. Where can I get additional information, I guess, about Medigap coverage?
Through the Medicare website. It has a wealth of information on there, and it might also be covered through SHIP, as I was saying, through your state plan. So you can look in there for buying Medigap coverage that specifically provides for overseas benefits.
Thank you, Judy. So I guess maybe take one or two more questions and then stop at 110. Here's one that we received prior. How do I protect myself from catastrophic medical bills? What do you think about this one, Todd?
Long-term care insurance is probably the best way, and appropriate health insurance, and to stay healthy.
Well,
but really long-term care insurance and good health insurance.
Thank you, Todd. I will actually add to that one. Having a good financial plan in place would help. It's interesting. We have a couple of questions about long-term care insurance. Extremely important, of course, and Judy is right. The best time to apply is between your age 48 and 56. Happens to be, statistically speaking. If you wait beyond that point, though, in many cases it becomes prohibitively expensive. So the idea is there any way for you to self-insure? So that is usually covered as part of a comprehensive financial plan. And this is not meant to say that, again, you should be doing it this way, but at least, take a look again at the big picture. So any other questions? I believe we covered most of them that were submitted to us prior, and some of them, of course, were covered when we were discussing the slides.
I think we should probably wrap up, Alex. We do have the upcoming events. Oh, you just left the page. In May, CBM is hosting a Certified Nonprofit Accounting Professionals Training event. And we do post our events on the website. Alex, next slide.
Yeah.
And here is our contact information. Slides will be sent out by Joe, I believe, Joe or Austin, to all of the participants. But here's the way to reach myself and Alex and Todd. And we're very happy that you've joined us for today's presentation. Hope that you learned a lot. I did from listening to Todd.
Same, actually.
Yeah.
A lot of
same here.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending. Take care, guys.
All right,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.